Subject. Emily and I haven't heard of this.
That's
Wonderful.
but.
Yes. I haven't, that's not mine.
Yeah.
I'll look here.
So give me an. There was me and Jim.
Do you need a chair? I can get you a chair.
I can make plenty of it. You can go over there.
During like drop off, not by that drop off, but like 2 weeks pretty quickly after. Maybe.
Right?
Oh.
Okay, I'm heading on.
I saw that there was an email.
What do you know? That's fine.
Okay, we will come to order, please. Welcome to the SBAC meeting for April 7th. Our first order of business will be to review the minutes from our last meeting. A motion to accept the minutes as sent.
So moved?
Second. Larry, are we doing those today? Absolutely.
James is online.
You did ask for the.
Okay, James already moved to the other meeting, and so,
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll get this.
really quickly for, any discussion on the minutes? All in favor? Opposed? Motion passes unanimously, thank you. Our, first order of business will be to move to executive session. If you are a committee member, it looks like, so Sue, I think you're the only one on this session. There's a new link that was sent to you, that we will shift over to when we go to exec session. For the other members of the public, we will adjourn to exec session for about an hour. We'll be back in this Zoom session at 7 p.m. To pick up the public portion of this meeting. With that, I'd like to submit a motion to adjourn to executive session.
So move.
Second.
All in favor? Opposed? Okay. With that, we will close this session down in Zoom and we will reconvene at 7 p.m. Thank you.
Hey, you guys are muted.
Testing, they're like, okay.
We're good?
Okay. Yeah, so let's make sure. Yeah, and it did work. We just did it to John on purpose. That was so hard.
I swear you're unmuted.
You're,
Ready to go? All right, so just an update on where we are in the schedule here, and I want to say we're getting to crunch time, but I think we've already been on crunch time here, so we're at 4:07. One of the big considerations in moving forward, and we'll see it in the next slide, is going to be how we accommodate the survey and moving forward. But one thing that Elisa said is lock the doors and don't let them out if they don't come up with the selection of the ABA option. So I know that you all have got that on your mind, and we'll try to sort out all those 6 options and how that works. But go ahead, Emily, to the next slide. So we've added the meeting on the 14th next week. And so the idea at that time is to review the development of the 2 options, the consolidated option and the ABA option as well. And so and then executive session to determine the recommended sites that we looked at today, and then finalize the survey content, which communication committee is going to spend a little bit of time just digging into a little bit more detail about what that means. And so in particular, some aspects of what we want to ensure is included in that survey, that second survey. So and then we've got school vacation week, a needed break for many of you, and then as we move forward, we're really digging into reviewing progress on the options now that we'll have it down to 2 options, and then sign off on the content for the survey. And right now, as we currently have it laid out, the survey would go live on the 29th. And right now we have the next community forum scheduled for April 30th. And that would provide an update on the preferred options that we've gotten it down to the 2, and then solicit community feedback. And then in May, we have May 5th and to review progress on the design and costs of. So at that point, we'll actually have some of the cost information back from our estimator on the consolidated option. The survey closes, if we keep to this schedule, survey closes on May 12th. And then we meet again that evening to review progress on the design of the options again, and then to look at the costs of the ABA, and then look at our process for reducing down to the 1 preferred option. And then the next, or May 16th, we've got survey results expected. So after the survey's closed on the 12th, but then to actually get the survey results compiled.
Get the results the Friday before, and then the following Monday is the day to discuss. So and in a form that makes sense to start digging into. And then May 19th, a review of the survey results and discuss the reduction of the options. And then we're into June, which looks at either there's a potential for pushing this up depending on how some of these things slide. But right now, June 2nd is currently the presentation of the final design concepts for both options, which include the site plans, and more elaborate than what we looked at tonight, floor plans, detailed project costs, the exterior massing, and exterior elevation. So that again is for the final design concept for both options. And then the joint town council and school board workshop. And last day of school right now, we understand it's the 11th. And June 16th would be the action to reduce it to the 1 preferred supported option.
and then to, the presentation to the school board on June 26th.
Thanks. Just a note, we're still kind of discussing that June 5th workshop, whether or not that needs to happen, given that 2 weeks later we'll present our final recommendations. So that's kind of a tentative one there. It's considered a placeholder for now.
That's where we are with schedule.
Questions on the long-term schedule? All right. Think we are, subcommittee readouts are next, right?
All right,
Tom?
Tom? Okay, so let's see, the last meeting we had was 2 weeks ago, and we voted to reduce to 2 options, one neighborhood school, one consolidated school, and we pushed that information out on the website and social media, published in the town newsletter, and also went out in the school district newsletter. From what I'm hearing, feedback has been positive to mixed. I mean, there's still a lot of unknowns. People want to know about location, they want to know about cost. And, you know, it's going to be that way until we can provide them with more information. We are expecting an article in the Leader this week, I hope. Drew might be listening right now. But he's hoping to put an article out about the outcome of this meeting and which school we're looking to replace. So we will continue putting information out about the process on social media and the website. Once we have 2 plans selected, we know which school we're replacing, we will put together a packet and send that out so people can look side by side at the options and understand what they are, and move forward from there. And the next big thing we have to look forward to is the survey, which we are in the process of very rough drafting right now. We'll be meeting with the survey company tomorrow, looking to share out a rough draft next week with you guys and take comment on that, and we'll continue refining it probably over Google Docs or email, since there will not be a meeting on the 21st. And we're looking to finalize and get that out by May 29th. But in terms of objectives for the survey, right now what we need to learn is the appeal of each option, likes and dislikes, identify a resident's preference between the options, understand is one more likely to succeed at referendum. We need to gain some clarity regarding the cost threshold. What will people support? We'd like to gain some clarity regarding the tax impact and share that out. And Tom has done some work on that and has some ideas about how we can share the tax impact with people. We want to identify potential scope reductions to bring the costs down and to understand voter concerns about each concept. And that's going to help inform how we continue to revise the concepts and help us to continue to message them and answer the questions that people need to know. See, one important thing, let me make sure I'm not missing anything. One important thing is that we are still limited in what we can share in terms of information. You know, everyone wants to know where it's going to be. We're still limited in what we can actually talk about. So we got to thread that needle. And then we're also limited in terms of costs. We will not have costs back from the estimator in time to put them in the survey. So there's going to be a rough order of magnitude costs. And it's going to be really key to just message properly around those things. And to that end, Paul very nicely, thank you, Paul, drafted an introduction that sort of sets the tone for the public. And so here's what we got. The purpose of this survey is to gather input from residents to help shape the school building solution that will appear on the November 2025 ballot. This includes understanding public preferences between 2 primary school concepts, feedback on potential locations, reactions to current cost estimates, and willingness to support potential cost-saving modifications or scope reductions. We want to be transparent that the cost estimates are still in the rough order of magnitude, currently around 133 million for either option, and that efforts to reduce the cost are actively underway. The project team is working with designers and engineers to identify opportunities to refine the building plans and reduce the tax impact while still meeting the community's long-term needs. This survey is a key part of that process. Your feedback will help the committee understand which elements are most important, which trade-offs are acceptable, and what voters are likely to support. We know these decisions affect both education and finances, and we're committed to shaping a project that reflects the community's values. That's the tone. Yeah, thank you, Paul. So that's where we are. Questions? Anything I missed?
And I just pulled up the schedule again, just so people, it's a much more expedited
Yes,
process this time, so I want people to sort of
yes.
have their expectations. met.
Absolutely. We are gonna work to get a draft or as fast as we can to get a draft. I mean, it's nice we're down to two options now. And and the research guys are great. They're just experts at that. How can we, they understand what we want to get. How can we organize this and put it out? So we will have something to you guys that's at least got this sort of the format and the questions and the information we think we can get at and how we want to try to articulate that. A lot of the stuff, the plans, drawings, and things that go in it, will still be in development most likely. And we'll keep, pushing that out to you as we can. So probably a lot of it will happen over email or shared Google Doc, since we'll be out for school vacation, some of us that week.
Thank you.
Sure.
Good update. Just, one thing for consideration, I had a few conversations around, I don't know how widespread this perception is, but some confusion that the price tags are for, particularly when we talk about the consolidated school, that it's $130 million for one school. And so as we think about how we, put these into the survey, a table that very clearly says, this is the cost for renovations at the middle school. This is the cost for renovations at Wentworth. This is the cost for renovations at each of the primary schools, or the cost to build a new school, so that people understand that that's not just a price tag for one school. It's a price tag for the overall project.
I totally agree with you, because I remember last time around thinking it was a $160 million school.
Right.
And I'm sure the information going out was clear, but yeah, I was like $160 million school. And now, yeah, we're looking at a $30 or $40 million renovation on the middle school. And I think when people understand that, the numbers start to put the numbers in context. So yes, that's definitely on the list of things to do.
Yeah, there's also some did you knows that we're developing right now, and we can incorporate those into the did you knows. Like, this is not $160 million school, this is this and this, so we can incorporate that.
I think that messaging is really important.
Mhm.
Very, very critical. And then the only other thing that I would ask is just, you guys have a huge lift in terms of trying to balance between educating and then also soliciting people's opinions. But my one request would be to just try and keep the survey as short as we possibly can. I know it's so hard because we want to be so thorough, but I think a 15-minute survey is just too long.
I had talked to Elizabeth about that this afternoon, when she
Yep.
said something, I basically said, we need to keep it short, we need to keep it doable.
Yeah.
And we need to keep it so
Yeah.
people finish it. So
That's all.
700 people don't.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that maybe if you have like an education piece that people could optionally go to because, it really is reflective of how people vote. Do you do your research before you vote, or do you just go in and vote off what you already have? So if they could be divided where you don't have to do all the click throughs for 15
Right.
minutes, but for those who want like a
Mhm.
area to go to, it's all right there. Our slides can be cumbersome to go through every week for people trying to come along, so.
Yeah, for sure. We'll talk to the research guys about how to do that.
And in our communications to the community, outlining that we did reduce the two, we kind of promised them a 2-option packet that shows all things like benchmarking, pricing, things like that. And
Yep.
we can have those things updated as get, more concrete information around pricing. So
Yep.
that'll kind of be the living document that will keep updated, kind of like the stop shop for everything, 2 options, not the 1 options for the community.
That's great, you guys are doing a great job.
Yep.
Yep. And we will have operating costs for the survey.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the key part of it.
The toughest thing for us is
Okay.
the cost aspect, both operating
Yeah.
and what it's going to cost, because we already got on the first survey, people wanted to know the cost. So we've got to get something up there. How we do that, we're still working on that. You guys can help us out a lot.
I think we give them what we have. We have rough order magnitude pricing. That's what we share. Any other questions, comments for comms?
Just, this is an ancillary thing at the town council joint meeting. There was a suggestion to try to move away from the term consolidated school. We may be way too deep in at this point. We're all very married to it, but I think it was about that partly because, this wasn't really said, but partly because it kind of relates to the previous effort as a consolidated school, and partly it was from the
Was
way
there
I
a
took it.
suggestion for?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
No.
Big neighborhood school.
Do we call it?
Get out our thesaurus.
That's right, like community school versus neighborhood school or something, I don't know, but
Yeah, I think community school sounds like a neighborhood.
I was just bringing the info to you.
Yeah.
I didn't like that idea though. Cause the group tried to do that in the first SBAC and that's what it is. It's a consolidated school.
Yeah.
And we need to be clear about what we're doing.
Yeah.
And by calling it a community school, you're lying. So we just need to we have to tell the truth. And we actually need to distinguish between the two as clearly as we can.
What was it like?
Not a community school, it's a consolidated school.
It's for
Like,
entire
for the
community as opposed to a
community.
neighborhood.
Or multiple neighborhoods together makes a community.
I think it implies.
I don't think we need.
implies-
I think what you're
that's
doing is you're muddying the waters by doing that.
Yes, I think it makes it
Yeah.
confusing,
It's a consolidated. school.
challenging though, challenging. I hear you. Baggage.
Okay. Did you have anything else?
To Elizabeth's point about what we can share, we met on the 27th. We had made a presentation in executive session. And until we have other duties assigned, I think we're standing by.
Thank you. From the leadership team, as was mentioned, we did the joint workshop last week. I think we're well received by both the council and the BOE. Very positive feedback from both. They're happy kind of with where we got to and how we got to where we are. Other than that kind of comment there about, how we communicate and things like that, I didn't have a ton of takeaways. It was mostly just good kind of discussion and back and forth. Anyone that was in the room have anything that really jumped out that they want to share with the group?
Only that I think that the message came across clearly that the committee has worked very hard to learn from the previous effort.
Yeah. And I think I'll just say, I thought it's a good sign that there really seems to be some consensus building within the two bodies, which I think will help whichever decision we go forward with, that there'll be, hopefully a very consolidated backing from the elected officials. My impression at this point is that there seems to be some consensus there. So that's a good thing, at least in their support, if nothing else. So. Next item is, we did get a response from the state regarding construction manager at risk. I'll let superintendent talk about that.
Yeah, so again, you had all asked me to get in touch with the state to see if they would consider a waiver for us for CM at risk. That was after I had shared with you the information from our own attorney. So I actually had a couple of written communications with the Commissioner of Education, Kendra Macon, had a phone call with her to bring her up to speed and describe our situation. And she forwarded my request to the Bureau of General Services. And so they held a meeting, I'm assuming based on this letter. Brian Keyser, who is the director of the Bureau of General Services, was the person communicating with me. I did share this letter with the BCL team members, but I will encapsulate it for all of you here. He said that while CM at risk is still part of the state statute, it has not been used. We talked about this, right, that it had been sunsetted. The Bureau of General Services is considering reactivating it, but this will take time. A selection panel for alternative delivery must be formed and scheduled. Its approval is required before any project can move forward under this method. Additionally, the state has work to do around rules and contract documents to update and approve. Basically, what he is saying is that even if it was allowable, the CM at risk process would still require the development of a detailed bid package and comprehensive construction documents. The they're saying that there is currently no waiver from the traditional design bid build process. That CM at risk is not currently available, although they anticipate in the future reviving the process where this could be approved. And then he went on to say, even if it becomes a possibility in the future, it might not offer the relief that we are seeking, as it would still involve the pre-qualification of subcontractors, the creation of detailed bid packages, and the submission of bids. So that, I think, gives us the information that we are seeking in terms of would they provide us a waiver at this time?
Questions, comments on that?
I guess, like, is there really, I just don't get it. We don't get 1 penny for them, the state, and we have to still follow this.
Yeah, there are lots of laws and statutes that we have to follow that we receive no funding for, right? That's part and parcel of living, right, under governmental rules, unfortunately.
Okay, the next item was regarding prefab construction method, prefabricated module construction method. There was a email sent out by Jim asking that we address this today. So yeah, I'll just to kind of bring the group back. I think it was either late January or early February. We talked about this. At one point we had said, well, let's get a ruling on CM at risk first, right? And then Harriman, I know, had some meetings with one of the vendors, one of the prefab vendors, and came away from that thinking that really there's not much cost savings, if any. But what I recall that we left it was that it was still a construction method that the contractor could pursue, the subs could pursue that if they chose, but we wouldn't dictate construction methods in the design. The hang up to that is obviously Harriman has to design around the constraints of a prefab module if that's a method that we chose. So with that, I'll just kind of hand it off.
Yeah, there's not much more from the last time we talked, but the idea is that there's still going to be components of the tool that can't be constructed in a modular fashion and delivered to the site. And so the pieces that we're talking about are those that oftentimes the classrooms, and we looked at some examples of the classrooms at Triumph that could be, but as we discussed, if they're going to build it to the same standards as permanent construction, there's really no savings in the materials. There is savings potentially in the contractor's schedule, because all of that is being constructed offsite and then delivered. And so the erection time of construction itself gets much shorter, and the general conditions that a contractor pays to be on site and manage all that component of the construction could be shortened potentially if that went in the modular. So you'd end up with a hybrid construction anyway. You'll end up with some components of the building that are going to be more traditionally constructed, and some portions that potentially be prefabricated and delivered to the site itself. And so you could consolidate the schedule, but our consideration is that you're probably not going to save significantly in that way, and we would have to definitely limit. You're going to limit the amount of contractors that can potentially provide the pre-manufactured construction. We'd have to develop a performance specification in order for them to follow, in order so that you get the level of quality that you're expecting. So that's kind of again just a little bit more detail on, I think, what just said, Sean.
Questions?
The one thing I found really attractive, whether is that this way I understood it. I know nothing about construction or building, but there's less disruption to the educational program if you can bring it already put together instead of hammering and sawing and whatever at the site.
Yeah, potentially, if you're shortening the duration of construction, there'd be less. If we're talking about an addition, it potentially is
less time that you'd have construction activity in the vicinity of that. So that, but again, there's a lot of different scenarios that we're considering right now. So that's one possible consideration.
So many things on.
Is that exactly?
Jim?
Have we come up with a percentage of savings by going with the modular? Because the last week or so, I've been getting a lot of calls, people talking to me about why haven't we come up with a number for the prefabs? They wanted to see that comparison.
Yeah.
If $130 million project, if we do 5%, that's $6.5 million right off the top. And that, I think that's what people are looking for. What is that difference? But after what Diane has read to us, it may be mute now, but I think the people should know that, you know, what the findings were we got back from the state.
Yeah, we have not determined what a potential cost savings through general conditions might be, because we have to look at exactly which scenario we're looking at, how much of it would be developed through a modular construction, and then actually evaluate what the potential reduction in schedule would be.
And also, Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought I had recalled Lisa saying that in your previous conversations with Triumph, they weren't able to demonstrate a project that was greater than 7,000 square feet.
Right. Today, we've asked them for an example of something at this scale, and they haven't shown a school project at this scale. So
I know Harvard and the packet they sent us in phase one.
Yeah.
They did a school classroom was 13.5.
yeah, I think there's a project designed by Shepley Bullfinch at Harvard. It's called their Idea Lab, I think, and very, very different than what we're looking at. So, but be happy to look at that in particular with you. But the one that I'm familiar with that they did the construction of was not at all like an elementary school like we're looking at.
But I think it's important. All the conversation lately has been, what's the cost? What's the difference? So we got to kind of communicate that to the public.
Yeah, I think again, as we start to narrow things down, we may be able to get a little more information to try to answer those questions.
I do think it's also important that as we're talking about these things like construction costs versus operating costs and things like this, we also want to think about what we're putting up. So are we saving X amount of money to have to then immediately, renovate earlier, cost of upkeep is going to, be higher and things like that. So, I think the same way that we look at things like operating costs along with construction costs, you can't only look at half the picture and say we could save this here, because you may just end up paying for it down the line in the quality of your building and what you have to pay to upkeep.
Yeah, I think if we've got just a couple of minutes. I know Todd replied to this group, but I think it's worth, hearing his opinion for the public as well. If you have some thoughts you'd want to share. Or we can summarize your email and put it in the notes.
Yeah, my experiences.
Can you come up so that you can be picked up by Mike? Sorry.
Just to the tape, there's Mike's on the
Yeah.
elevator. This is Todd Jepson for the public. He's the director of facilities.
My experiences with the modular buildings that we own, which are all Skiavi modulars, used to be made in Oxford and now they're made in Georgia and trucked up here. And majority of my experience is maintaining them. We've only added 6 classrooms in my 15 years here. But the maintenance in terms of the models that we have received, I think we received them under the auspices of these are temporary. And that we're not going to keep them for 20+ years. That hasn't held to be true, as we all know. And so I don't think they were designed to last more than maybe 10, 12, possibly 15 at the most. And so as a result, we'll just focus on the middle school and the 8 corners ones, because those are the largest pods. The original 6 at 8 corners and the 12 at the middle school, we've basically redone those entirely inside. Roofs, heating systems, carpeting, flooring, painting, bathrooms, since we bought them. So it's really hard to determine whether, if we actually went with a modular construction and compared apples to apples quality with traditional construction, how much you really save. And I mentioned in my email that the specification book that Harriman provides when they're doing regular traditional construction means you follow these specs per our request, you do this to any contractor who bids on the project. And I believe if you put that set of specifications to a modular builder, they would have a hard time, A, achieving it for any savings, and B, they might be unwilling to do it. I don't know that. But when we met with the Triumph, the facilities director in Hopkinton, Mass, who had Triumph modulars, and they're a little different than ours, but not radically. He specifically said he'd been managing buildings for a long time, commercial level, said he questions whether they saved any money in getting them set up and operating at the Hopkinton School. And, you know, he'd been there long enough to see that they have their limitations, and that, again, you know, their plan was to use them temporarily, and in fact, the ones we looked at, they're planning on moving to a different school while they reconfigure or renovate, rehabilitate that school, which was about the era of our old one, and in way worse shape, in my opinion. So I just know that they take a lot more effort to maintain because of the way they were built. So when we did the 6 that I've added on in my time here, I've rejected the flooring. We put in our own flooring. I've rejected the lighting. We put in our own higher efficiency lighting because I just know that we're going to keep using them for a while here until we get through this process. So there's just a few things that I really think that the quality you're going to get is not at the same level as traditional stick built, and therefore I don't think will last as long. And the reason ours have lasted long is because you've put a lot of money into them.
So what I'm hearing is, right, the takeaway is there'll be a building standard. Construction methods are TBD based on the general contractor, but they have to meet the standard that we put together. And if that build, you know.
And I want to make sure that this group knows, if you want to bring in Triumph or another modular builder, I'm totally open to listening to them and asking them questions. I don't want to close them off before they even show up. I'm totally open and happy to talk and come up with a whole pile of questions with the folks at Harriman to see if it's something that makes sense and can save us millions.
When we looked at this in phase 1, Jack and I talked to the folks at Triumph. I specifically asked them if we spec'd out concrete floors, could they do that? Could they do metal studs? Could they do the steel roof rafters? And their response was, whatever we spec, they would meet, the same as traditional construction. They also have temporary modules. There's a difference, if you read the literature, there's a difference. The permanent modulars sit on a concrete foundation, where the temporary ones are either precast piers, sonotube, and they have a, what do I want to call them? Steel
Structure.
Steel structure underneath.
That's what ours have. Ours are on foundations with the exception of this, 4 most recent at Pleasant Hill, which are
But the
on.
frames are still attached, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And they're all steel frames underneath, with the wheels still attached. But you have steel structures in our sit largely, with the exception of those 4, on a concrete foundation.
I thought we had a process problem with all this where the state was going to require the way this would work through the bid build process was that you'd hire a GC who would subcontract to the modular company. When that happened, I assumed that kind of took away the savings and that GC is not gonna just do that as a pass-through. He's gonna put a margin on his costs from the modular company, and therefore that margin in effect would kind of negate the physical savings, but it might be
Yeah,
wrong.
well, no, I think that's the way it would be structured. What you want is you want a single prime contract and a single point of responsibility. And so you are gonna hire a contractor to be that. He is gonna then be able to do some of the work himself. But anything that they purchase from subcontractor, they are assuming responsibility, and so therefore they're going to cover themselves with respect to whatever they cover.
And that's the way the state said we would have to run that from a contracting standpoint.
Because,
right?
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other, Ray, did you have a comment or question on this?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Anything else on prefab?
Yeah, I had a question for Todd. So Todd, he and I exchanged a couple emails last week and, so were those were temporary, modulars that you looked like that two floor?
Yes, they were temporary.
Really?
Well, they had been there longer, the two-story one, well, actually, they were both two-story, the old one and the new one, they just had a different look to them. So the oldest ones, they both had metal siding, the oldest ones kind of looked more like a warehouse kind of a look, it had the corrugated vertical siding. And the newer ones kind of had a little bit more of an appealing finish, they had panels and it was kind of mixed colors and it just looked a little bit more modern. But they were both temporary. In fact, the newest ones were sitting on sonotubes. They weren't on a foundation and they had chicken wire around them to keep the pests out. So
The heating scale, when they talk about like R3, I don't remember, is the insulation rate? Is it, can they achieve like proper insulation in temporary?
I would imagine if you asked them to build a R21 wall, they would build an R21 wall. But again, I think the more you ask for, the more you pay for it. Just like anything. I mean, you want all the fancy bells and whistles on a new car, you're gonna get a more expensive car. So I believe it's the same. You probably the good, better, best approach. If you want just the basic temporary, we need it to last 6, 8, 10 years. You pay for the cheapest one and throw it out when you're done. Whereas if you're gonna keep it for 20 to 25 years, you probably put a little more into it and pay more as a result.
Okay. Last item before we get into the design updates. There's been some discussion around soft costs and what's in the estimates. And I just wondered if you'd take a minute and just kind of walk us through that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there was an email that we saw where there's a little confusion on what is considered a soft cost. And so when we looked at the rough order of magnitude and the breakdown that was provided, we have divisional costs. So for instance, we've got the roofing, we've got the siding, we've got all these line items that add up to a number. And then we have markups on top of that number. So we have all these material and labor costs. And then the general contractor has markups on top of that. So they've got their general conditions, they've got overhead and profit, they've got bonds and insurance. And so those markups are part of the construction cost. You pay the contractor for those markups. And so, and sometimes we put escalation, as we're estimating, we'll put escalation in there because we know it's going out to bid in the future. So that's still part of what we assume is going to be paid to the contractor. That's a hard cost, a hard construction cost. And then on top of that, we have all the other soft costs as part of the project budget. And that is for the design of the project itself. So the architects and the engineers, our fees, there's contingencies, there's furniture and fixtures, there's permit costs that you have to do. All of those are outside of what you will pay a contractor for. So you're gonna pay all those other services. Those are the soft costs. And so there's a difference between the markups, the contractor shown in the contractor's cost and the soft costs, which are above and beyond what you're gonna pay a contractor. So I hope that's helpful in clarifying that, because I think there was some confusion on it.
Questions?
you also have a contingency in.
There's contingency in
If-
both.
If the general contractor has put in for permits and contingency and escalation, which is normally part of the soft cost, aren't we paying for that twice?
No, so right now, because we haven't actually designed the whole building, there is a design contingency that the estimator carries in their estimate, because they have to assume there's some scope that they haven't seen yet, because the project hasn't been fully designed, so they can't count every doorknob yet, and they can't count every square foot of flooring or anything like that. So they have an estimating contingency in the estimate right now. That's separate from what the owner will carry as a project contingency, because the project needs to have some cushion to absorb costs that are unforeseen as a project being delivered. So that's a little, the word contingency is used, but they're very, very different things.
Because the town will carry an owner's contingency, right? And then, but when the GC bids, they will add contingency to their bid to cover their unforeseen issues. So-
They're gonna give you a number, and whether if they carry a big contingency, it may not be the lowest
Right, did I
bid.
get
So
that right?
they are gonna give you a number, that's their number. And so they've got to account for what they think they're gonna need to build it. But that's separate from what the owner is gonna carry. So for instance, if something is unforeseen underground and there's unsuitable soils that have to be replaced, then the owner needs to have some ability to pay for that during the construction. So the project itself will carry an owner's contingency for unforeseen conditions.
So if the contractor puts money in for a permit, that's part of their cost.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then when
So
the final dollar amount comes out, we put in soft costs. We're paying for that permit again.
no, so what, we will ask the contractor to pay for permitting, but we'll ask the contractor will carry money for the building permit. So when the contractor goes to the town and says, I want a building permit, they'll fill out their application, they'll pay for a building permit. We have to do environmental permitting before we even get to the point of putting this out to bid for a contractor. So that environmental permitting costs money, and we'll carry that under the soft costs. We'll also look at other things that sometimes are carried outside of the contractor. So State Fire Marshal's office is oftentimes permitted separately. The contractor usually is not applying for that.
I think it would be helpful if we could get what's in the soft cost,
Absolutely.
what those dollars are
Yeah.
paying for,
That's it.
because it's very confusing.
Yep.
Because when I started looking at that, I'm saying we're paying for soft costs, right?
Sure, we can share that with you. Yeah.
My other question is, looking through this, they use square footage cost for doors. And they had, I think it was like 9,008 square feet of doors at a cost. I've never seen a project
Right.
projected like that.
Yeah, and they do a couple ways. And we can get into some degree of detail on the estimate if it's helpful, just to understand how they built their estimate. But the estimators get a lot of experience understanding how to build the conceptual estimate at this point in the project before they know exactly every detail of the design. But we can share that.
The reason they're being, right, the design's not finalized enough that they would know how many doors, so they base it on square footage of the.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, they did it on casework, windows.
Again,
They
it's a
put it-
little bit of this and that at this point in the design. And so they have to evaluate it based on some of it that they can assume a certain amount of casework in each classroom, and they can add that up. But then there are other things that they just don't know how many they're going to be. And so they look at past projects and what we've carried, and they use that as their a guidance for how to estimate.
I could go on, but I'll let it go.
We can meet some other time if you want, and we can go on into more detail if you want, but yeah.
But I really think the committee should take and start getting numbers so we can, it isn't that I don't trust you.
Yeah.
But trust and verify.
Sure, we will, if it's helpful, we'll give you a breakdown of what soft costs represent.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah.
So that will bring us straight into update on design and your guys' slides, and then we'll go from there.
Very good. So this is a table that we put together to help understand the 6 different options that were included in the information that you've received. And so the ABA. And so to really think about it as 2 sets of 3 options, right? So one of them looks at a replacement school of 300 students and maintaining 2 others. And so in that 300 student model of the replacement school, you're approximately looking at 5 classrooms per grade level. The other 3 options look at a larger replacement school, but less classrooms in the 2 remaining elementary schools. And so under the, and it looks at varying efficiencies at which school that you retain and which school you replace. And so for, and I hate to add more nomenclature, but the ABA, one way of considering is the 300 student school. So if the replacement is Pleasant Hill for the 300 student, the total price tag for the entire project cost, not just that portion of it, is $133.8 million. And if we look at the larger 380 student replacement school with the slightly smaller additions to the remaining 2, Eight Corners and Blue Point, then it's slightly more expensive by $200,000. So that is the difference between those 2 options there. Subsequently, and you can sort of figure out from there going forward. But we thought it would be helpful to understand, seeing it this way, the order of magnitude difference in what exactly the primary differences in the options are. And so we can go now through each of them if you want to, but this shows pretty much what I just said. It shows the enrollments of each of the schools. And so in this case, this is again thinking of the 300 student replacement school. Blue Point would have 287 students, and Eight Corners would have 254 students. And so, and this is how essentially we arrive at the different total cost by looking at how much additions we're adding to each of them and how much is renovated. So in this case, that results in that price tag of $133.8 million. So, and then the next slide, I think, the benchmarking associated with this option. So, and a lot of the benchmarking where you see the deficiencies is around the amount of constraints on the site for play space or for expansion are really the 2 areas that are primarily impacted by this. And so the next one is looking at it, instead of replacing Pleasant Hill, that we replaced Eight Corners. And we looked at the enrollments then. In this consideration, Blue Point would be 287 and Pleasant Hill would be 290. And then this one identifies 260. And I think that is correct because of the capacity of Pleasant Hill at 290. So this one is slightly less than the 300 for the replacement school is a little bit less than that just because there's capacity elsewhere. But that is a total of 133.2 million in this scenario. And then the next one looks at the replacement of Blue Point. And so Eight Corners has 254, Pleasant Hill has 290, and the replacement school has 300. So that one is the 300 student replacement model with a price tag of 135.4 million. And then moving to the second one, which are so this is the second set of 3, which again, the big difference is that the enrollment of the replacement school is larger. and the classroom additions are lessened because we're building a larger school. So Blue Point, in this case, would have 232. Pleasant Hill would have 224, and the new replacement school would have 380. So a greater difference in terms of the number of classrooms that you're going to see in the new. It's taking advantage of building new. And so the price tag for this is 132 million. The next consideration is looking at the replacement for Pleasant Hill. So Blue Point would have 232, Eight Corners would have 236, and then the new one would be 380. And then lastly, if the replacement for Blue Point, Eight Corners has 236, Pleasant Hill has 225, and the new store is 280. And so this was the most expensive option of 137.2 million. And so I think the probably again the easiest way of trying to think about all that is that table that we put together at the beginning. Again, the one thing that it doesn't show is the enrollment at the one option of if the replacement is for Eight Corners, it's 260 versus 300.
So I will just note that the slide deck was updated at 5:45, and handouts were made earlier this afternoon. So as Mark was reading off some of those numbers, if you were looking at your handouts for the number of students that each school can load, those are different numbers than are on the slide deck that Mark is reading from. So our apologies for that. You know, we were trying to be ready in advance. But not on our email at
Let me go,
5:40,
Jennifer.
sorry.
No.
Go ahead, Jenna.
I was noticing, and maybe this would be different on the updated version, but like if I look at the original replaces Eight Corners where there's the 300 students versus the one where there's 380. The benchmarking compromises appear to be the same for both. I guess my expectation prior to reading this would have been that if you're making Eight Corners larger, maybe in like Pleasant Hill, for instance, you wouldn't need to clear cut because you're taking up lesser space. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think so. If you're specifically thinking about the reduction at Pleasant Hill, or
Yeah, so say we were to replace Eight Corners, it looks like Pleasant Hill would be clear cut regardless if Eight Corners is a larger school or a smaller school. My expectation would be if Eight Corners is a larger school, do you need to take up as much space at Pleasant Hill?
because, and I think probably John can speak to this, because the site is so constrained, and I think Tommy pointed that out earlier, it is such a constrained site there that the change in classrooms doesn't have that much of an impact when we're thinking about that buffer at the edge of the site. It's just such a small site that we're going to need every inch of it. And so that's why.
Okay, and additionally, Jenna, I think like, as you think about the Pleasant Hill site and the renovations that we've seen laid out on the maps earlier, we're adding a bus loop and a parent parking loop. We're adding a parking lot on the left of the facility. And currently, there isn't enough even regular playground space.
Right.
And so that clear cutting happens because the addition happens on the left, and then you need that forested area for playground area.
Yeah, okay.
One follow-up to that though, can I ask, does the scenario change at all if we do a two-story addition on Pleasant Hill? I know that question was asked a few weeks ago and I don't think there's been an answer to it yet.
I'm not sure, so I can come back and look at that.
Appreciate it.
The numbers that was up there, the total cost, that also includes the Wentworth and middle school work also. Correct. Because that's why.
Oh, it does.
Right.
The
Yeah,
public,
that's
the
the
public
whole-
will look at that the 3 schools would be 130.
Right. Good point, Jim.
The other question I have is the middle school. You indicated by putting the addition on
This is the new.
right side of the building facing the parking, some parking would be eliminated. But aren't we picking up the parking space where the modulars are now?
Yeah, I think that's what we talked
We've
about.
accounted for that.
Yeah,
And
correct.
even counting that, we're still short parking spots?
I'm not sure I think we were.
That it only, I think it only decreases parking by 3 parking spots. It says here.
Are you thinking of being out a hard space for the kids? A hard surface play space? Is that?
I don't remember.
No, the middle school addition would sit on the current faculty parking lot.
Yep.
So we wouldn't be losing field space.
Um,
That's the question you're asking.
no, the hard surface play space. At least on the compromise for option 1, middle school, under the ABA replacing.
Missing non-hard space.
Under the option,
Found parking hard surface area.
yeah. Presumably like their break surface where they can play like basketball and such.
Well, I mean, they don't have that area right now, so I think this just is to point out they would continue to not have that, right? Like, so during their movement break at the middle school, the children play on the driveway, the delivery driveway. That's what we have for space for them, right? We're looking forward to better weather coming so that the kids can be on the grassy area again. But in this winterish period of time, that is where they currently play. So we don't have dedicated hardscape areas as we do at our elementary schools.
Question on the siting we reviewed earlier. This, those sites where we showed building a new primary school, does that accommodate the school, the larger version, also the 380 students versus the 300 students?
Yeah,
Okay.
correct. That's right.
Question.
I think we're looking somewhere between the 8 to 10 acres would support the 300 or the 380 student school.
Okay, great, thanks.
Good question.
One other question. Blue Point was still shown in the area, in the lower area behind the school. And we looked at moving that down where the portables are now. My concern is we start excavating that and pulling the stumps out. We don't know how deep those are. We have to fill them. We're gonna have to wait for that to settle.
Yeah, I think right now, we're showing that addition going out into that direction. And we haven't done any degree of site testing to understand what might be there. So there's still a little bit of unknown and we have to confirm that as we move forward.
Have we run numbers, putting it down where the portables are now?
Oh,
Yeah,
on the other
yeah.
side? Yeah, I think we have looked at that. Again, I could go back to look at what that scenario looked like, but we did look at that.
If I remember correctly, this question came up and Lisa said that because they need to use that area to have the kids be going to school in, that it would be very hard to put the addition on that end because they're counting on the kids being able to go to school there while we
During the
renovate.
construction.
That was why.
You gotta
We
keep the
had to
portables in
site,
place while they-
exactly, we had to site the new build away from the existing portables because we needed to use those while we built.
And then I think it's flagged as a pre-K, or excuse me, a room for future expansion
I'm just
opportunity.
concerned excavating that.
Sure, I totally get
We have
it.
to go down 4 or 5 feet to take those stumps out. Gonna have to preload that before we put a foundation on.
Yeah, and we'll look a little bit further at that as we get further into that, but.
Would that put an additional cost on renovations or addition for the Blue Point?
Right now, we're assuming a certain amount for the foundation or for the prep.
Wouldn't that be covered by a contingency perhaps?
That could potentially.
There we go.
in
That's
that
why you have a
estimating-
contingency.
the Estimating contingency where we are right now in the site, that's one of those items that could be suitable. Yeah. But it would be a marginal amount more for foundation or for the pad. Correct.
So Lisa's request was for us to pick one of these by the end of tonight.
Correct. That's right.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in order for us to move forward the stakes of this.
Yeah,
Sitting back.
We have to select one of these. So just so everybody knows, Harriman's next task, right, is to take the two options that we selected 2 weeks ago to full concept, so they can send them back to the estimators and get a more detailed cost structure and have a better, concept of what this is, so we can show the community. They're gonna take both of those to full concept design. They can't do that until we make some decisions. We don't have to decide on the middle school tonight, but we have to decide on this. Because obviously it completely changes what they're designing to and which school they're designing to. So we do need to, before we leave tonight, get to a decision on this.
Can I ask you to repost or reshow your summary table? If I'm recalling correctly, there's only one outlier. Everything else is, well, okay, now a little further. 0.75%.
And Charlie, I think to Lisa's point, the communication committee shares her thoughts. Because we have to communicate this, we have to start getting stuff out, and we're really up against it right now, so we really need to help get this moving.
I do think it's notable that we've kind of all acknowledged as a community, or as a committee, excuse me, that Eight Corners carries the least neighborhood feel and also carries the lowest price tag on both options.
It also covers the area where there's the most growth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it covers the most of the benchmarking.
Thank you.
And so to your point, Alyssa, it has the least neighborhood feel. Can you say more about that in terms of are you seeing that as a positive or a negative?
I think if we're hearing our community and their desire to have kind of the neighborhood feel to schools, and with the location of where Eight Corners is in an environment where the sidewalks aren't plentiful, it's not kind of tucked in a neighborhood like Pleasant Hill and somewhat Blue Point. The ability to move that school seems like it would give us the most opportunity to kind of uphold that in a different location where we could take the one that's feeling the most pressures from the growing population and put it somewhere where people, closer to a neighborhood or closer to walkability and things like that.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I was imagining that you were going to say that it is the least contentious site in
That
terms
too.
of adding on to, because there are not neighbors. And we battled that pretty heavily in our last referendum. Right, everyone wants a new school as long as it's not in their neighborhood.
And the additions are gonna go pretty close to property lines at any of these sites.
Yeah.
With that.
I just want to be really clear. We're not picking which school. We're picking between these two options, or we are right
No,
now
we're picking
deciding
which-
Pleasant Hill, Eight Corners, Blue Point.
Which
There
school,
are
which
six-
option?
There are 6 options, we have to pick one.
Is anyone else really surprised by that information? Just me?
Yeah.
I'm very surprised that there's a decision point tonight, and I didn't, admittedly, I did not realize that was a decision point that we were making tonight.
I think Harriman told us that.
Yeah, we
Harriman
heard that
told us
last
that.
meeting, yeah.
Do it.
In my defense, I put it in the agenda and in my
Nope,
email.
that's
when I sent out the-
That's totally fine. Guys, it would not be the first time that I had to eat it in public and be like, I didn't know. I've been at this a long time. I have very little shame left. So I will say, I'm confused though still, that we really have 2 decision points to make. So we need to decide which school we think is the most appropriate to replace, and then we need to decide whether we're gonna go up at that school with the enrollment, but, and decide between 300 and 380. Okay,
And do we also have one other thing that we have to vote on as well? The middle school one and middle school 1.2, do we have to?
I think we can wait on that tonight.
I asked Lisa about that. She said, we can go another week. We can
Okay.
postpone that one, but she said, we cannot leave today without making a decision on this. I bought us some time.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Again, Charlie,
What?
can I say that again? We don't have to decide.
On the middle school option 1 versus 1.2, we will decide next week. This week, so that they can move forward with design, they need a decision on this.
So both these numbers represent middle school 1 and 2.
These are the higher, this is middle school 1, this is option 1.
Yeah.
So if you look at the dashboards, you have, both prices are on the dashboard. So this chart only has middle school option 1 on it.
Charlie, Sue's got her hand raised.
Okay, I got one in the room first, Sue, and then I'll come to you. Go ahead, Rob.
So I think part of what we asked Karaman to do, there were two things really, and that chart's really helpful. One was to see if there was a significant difference in cost if we maximized the enrollment at the new school instead of evening out the enrollment among the three. So that's part of what this is showing, right? And then I think the other thing we asked was, would there be a really big difference in cost comparing closing one of these schools to the others? And the answer appears to be no.
Right.
So it's interesting that, in fact, both of those did not really seem to change the numbers too much. Which to me suggests, personally, going back to the idea of trying to equalize the enrollment among the three. Understanding that redistricting may happen, but if there's an opportunity to make them roughly equal size and there's no significant cost difference, I don't know why we wouldn't do that.
Sue?
Yeah, I had a question about Pleasant Hill. If we don't replace Pleasant Hill, that piece of land that we are thinking about, could that be developed into housing?
Yes.
Sure.
So it's not, so we could create would you think that it's likely that it would become housing?
Almost certainly, yes.
Okay. Answers my question.
For those slides that you updated, I know all the, on each of the options, we have $6 million for new sites where they're required. Were those baked into those numbers? That's 6 million across the board?
Is
The site cost? Yes.
Yes,
it is.
Yes.
Okay, so one caveat I've been working on while I've been doing this is there's a huge swing. When we're looking at the numbers right now, we're looking at it with the assumption that every option will cost $6 million across the board. What we saw earlier tonight were up to what? 8 different options, I guess? Well, there was different, like additional plots associated with them, right?
This much. How
Yeah,
far you go.
yeah. And I just want to, we have the acreages of those associated with them, right? So Harriman, so PCM, based on their estimate that we got, they were carrying $300,000 an acre as an assumption. I think before we talk any of this cost, like we need to be looking at these with the site costs that we can derive off of the information we were presented tonight. And by looking at that, under all these different scenarios, under these 6 different options that we're looking at tonight, there's a 15% difference in cost when you allocate certain sites, right, like Pleasant Hill only has that one, or I go whatever per se. So I'm just saying, like, these numbers, I don't think we should be using. We should be getting them all apples to apples by taking those totals, removing the $6 million out of each option, and then assigning the real world kind of options with the assumption of still carrying $300,000 an acre on that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
It makes sense to me, Dave, that I think the challenge is now you're adding a layer of complexity to where essentially, with perhaps the exception of one, right, you're looking at 4 options per option. So we went from 6 choices to 24 choices, just like that, right?
Yeah,
And
I'm not saying like, for my own sanity, this is just the way my head works, like. We should be taking all the information that we have necessary and inform, in our decision, especially we're voting tonight, like, we should be taking into account the information we were presented earlier, get everything apples to apples, right? Like, some sites won't work with Pleasant Hill, some sites won't work with Blue Point, like, look at all that. Then determine the total costs associated with option 1 and 2 of each option to get a better understanding of what we're actually voting on in terms of cost.
We have no idea if the land deal will close.
We don't, but we also don't know that like these are gonna be like $6 million for whatever site it ends up getting at, right? Like.
I think one thing we can also look at is the benchmarking. If you look at the benchmarking, I know the cost is very similar and everything between the two, but the benchmarking isn't comparing when you have a larger school offloading some of those littlers. You have an opportunity to have like an appropriately sized library, room for future expansion and things like that. So the price tag isn't necessarily different, but the benchmarking, ergo the students' experiences is different.
We'll hear you on that and I will push back on you. We can derive actual costs on the land based on the acreages that we were presented tonight under the assumption that Harriman has been carrying, which is $300,000 per acre. We can then level all of these options with that new data to get updated overall total costs. And then on top of that, so I went through here while we were doing it and calculated like the benchmarks that were essentially hit off of each option. And then I think it's like that. And we compare those, we weight those, and I think that could point us in the right direction. If it might be sense.
So I wasn't actually pushing back on what you were saying. I was just giving it
Oh, okay.
a total aside. But I think we also have 15 more minutes of this meeting technically, and you just mentioned about 3 weeks worth of work. No.
So you were just running all the numbers, Dave, anything well over 6 based on your calculations? Like, so if we keep 6 across the board for simplicity's sake, and also because it's the number we've been working with since day 1. Yep. We're only gonna really realize savings as a result of our decision. It's not gonna, there's nothing in there that if we pick, is like, oh, actually that's 20, right?
Not 20. So if you take out the outlier, which is the town park, which is free, you're ranging from 4 to 16.
Make the assumptions about the potential to subdivide.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's really hard. Yeah. Saying, because we're struggling because we're trying not to be specific, site specific, but to suggest that there's a range between 4 and 16, that site that potentially is 16 had a million variables to a deal that we have no insight into whatsoever. Like, I just don't know how we could possibly factor that into our decision making other than to kind of assure ourselves that we're not going to spend $16 million as part of the land deal.
One other consideration is that a larger parcel than is needed strictly for the school construction may be advantageous for other uses, whether it's a park, whether it's whatever.
Field space, whatever, yeah.
Community center.
I don't want to say the word.
Can we think about it? I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
Dave.
and
So do I,
you know, it's-
Dave. I'm
It's
not-
totally unreasonable right now to try to do
No,
this, just saying like.
But
we have
if
the
we,
data.
if we, for the purposes of trying to get to a decision point tonight, we've controlled for the land variable by just using a flat 6, right? If you look at just the, the merits of each of these 6 options, land aside, could we come to a decision, or is the land such a great variable that it's critical, to this? I mean, it strikes me that I think that my gut tells me, these are pretty close size wise, so I start thinking about like impact to the sites, what sites are best suited for an expansion or worse suited for an expansion. I could get myself there without talking land. If we control for the land, and I know that that's not perfect, but I could get there and then we can solve the land problem. Is the rest of the committee feeling kind of the same way? Cause you're right, it's unreasonable, but if it's something that the team feels we ought to pursue before we make a decision, we can talk about that. But
Yeah, I think you hit on it, like metrics, or like as far as metrics, what I think we should, as a committee, come to an agreement as what metrics we're gonna take to inform the vote. And I think like benchmarks, right, like percentage benchmarks achieved, et cetera. Obviously total cost. You could do cost per student. I don't know. I feel like some of those, like we should come to a consensus and be like, let's look at it this way rather than just, I don't know, making a decision based on some.
Isn't kind of the point of us as a, collective entity of our community and first representation of all of us, that we feel all those different perspectives to inform our vote. So like, Dave, if you wanna use the matrix, and I'm like, my mind kind of works the same way, with like more like numbers and analytics, like that's great. But if someone has more gut feelings, like I feel like that should be represented and allowable as well. Because like if we're gonna just throw it all into a matrix, why wouldn't we even vote?
Sure. For what it's worth, I don't even know what you call it. 8 Corners, the 380 version of 8 Corners is the cheapest overall. It is also tied for first in the percent of benchmarks achieved at 95%. Therefore, the cheapest cost per benchmark.
That's my favorite too. So I told you, same mind.
I don't know, that's an interesting insight right there. If we're just looking at those costs and benchmarks achieved,
Just for replacing 8 Corners.
that would be the.
I don't disagree, right? And this is where, sorry, did you want?
One thing that's really missing too, is Fred brought up, do we know we could go up on Pleasant Hill? For a second floor, right?
We don't know that right now.
We don't know that, right, we don't know that. So it's kind of a missing piece of information.
It is a 2-story addition at Pleasant Hill, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a 2-story addition.
I think it's a one floor,
I thought it was one.
it's a 1-floor addition, I think.
The question I have is.
I hope I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's a one.
I thought it
Two
was.
stories.
I thought it was.
Two?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
1 story for the gymnasium, and behind that, the 2-story.
But is it possible, part of the question was why wasn't more of it 2-story? I mean, we had this discussion,
No school's been 3-story.
no, I didn't say that. I said, why couldn't more of the square footage be on a 2nd story?
Well, you couldn't add a 2nd story to the existing structure. Your space constraints, so the way that the site is laid out, in order to have parking on one side, can we bring up the site laydown? And so on one side of it, and I only remember this because I just briefed it last week, but the parking structure, the parking area takes up that whole side. The other side, to have the fire lane that comes around, you're actually like right on the edge of it.
Yeah.
And so you just didn't have any more space.
So it was on.
Talking about public assistance.
Hey, Jim, you can probably answer this real quick. I think one difference between option A and B was that option A designed a two-story Pleasant Hill addition. Option B had a one-story addition. I think that's what I'm getting hung up on. And since this is based off of the A, then it's a two-story addition.
Which story?
Pleasant Hill, Pleasant Hill.
Yeah, I thought it was a, yeah.
Yeah, all right, two stories, so it's
So
all,
there's two then.
all right, good, all right.
You might have been where it said the one part that was one story. That's the, that's the cafeteria.
Right.
Yeah, but nonetheless, I think, whatever, it's a move on at this point.
Okay.
Well, I mean, just to piggyback on the points that have most recently been made, the thing I like about, replacing Eight Corners is that, just going back to Pleasant Hill, that's the one that, has the smallest student population at Pleasant Hill. Which, am I correct in assuming that that probably has the less impact on the square footage of that whole property?
It does, even though it's still a constrained site, the smaller
Yeah.
the population, the less of an impact.
But it's like the best we can do at Pleasant Hill.
My thoughts on this, just personally, I kind of share the sentiment that Eight Corners is a weird location for a school, traffic and like, it's not safe to walk around. It doesn't have that neighborhood feel to it. But it's also the biggest lot and can accept the additions that it needs better than the others. I'm a little torn because I think Pleasant Hill probably has the most of that neighborhood feel to it. But it's too small, frankly. I don't think anybody's gonna be happy with the end product at Pleasant Hill for that site laydown that we just looked at. It's so constrained and so compromised. Not to mention you know, we don't know what kind of blowback we'll get from the neighbors when we say we're gonna cut all their trees down and they have to find somewhere else to, you know, play. I know that maybe that shouldn't be a consideration, but it is. It's the reality of where that site is and the dozen abutters to that property.
Cause I do think, like, looking at that footprint, it does look like that pretty much all of the trees around back and on the side would need to come down, unfortunately, which is a tough call.
But yeah, thank you. The site plan calls for essentially clear cut in the whole lot.
Yeah.
So,
If I were a neighbor, I would hate that.
yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
and like, we talked about before, I don't think we necessarily need to be prioritizing parking lots and bus loops when we can have, you know, street parking and other things to kind of keep the space. I think that's something we can address later.
There's no street parking on Highland. Pleasant Hill, it's not an option. Eight Corners, it's not an option.
It can be made an option. You know, there's not street parking on Pine Point, but people do it all the time.
But there's like,
That's a good argument.
yeah.
James, people
The
already
PD
do
have
street
access
park
to
around there. It's all, street parking already does happen at Pleasant Hill.
Well, there you go. Then
no,
then
I'm actually-
get the town
I'm
council to make it happen on the streets. Like, you know, it's very common for street parking to happen around schools.
Well, James, I'm actually arguing against you though. It's just not an ideal situation there.
Yeah.
It's a lot thinner of a road compared to how wide, especially when you're getting kids in and out of cars.
Right now, people have to park in the neighborhood.
We have our Pleasant Hill principal here tonight, in case you guys don't recognize her. This is Jen Humphrey.
Yeah,
She
I'll
can
just say
easily
that
Speak to this.
our police department have asked us at evening events when we invite the community in to stay off of Highland. Because it's a congested area, the speed limit there being worrisome for pedestrians getting in and out of cars and that type of thing. So when we have evening events and we're inviting the whole school, an example of that would be our fall open house. We've got hundreds of people coming in. We ask them to park in the back neighborhood and walk up through or across the street on Woodland Road. And there is a crosswalk there, so they have to go up into that neighborhood to park. But our lots currently at Pleasant Hill don't even suffice for our staff. So we have some pictures that we just recently gathered that show staff parking in snow like this on the grassy areas to the side of the parking lot that abuts the school on the left-hand side when you're facing the school. So there's definitely a dearth of parking at Pleasant Hill.
Satellite picture has cars on the lawn out back right there. There you go.
Yeah, you can see them right there, and you know, that's fine if it's not muddy. Or if it's not snow covered or ice covered.
It's the one most of school is.
2/3 of the year, I mean. Yeah, I echo Charlie's kind of torn feeling. I feel like people are very attached to Pleasant Hill and would be disappointed to hear that that was the school that was going to be replaced. But at the same time, I am very concerned that people are going to be disappointed by the renovation. That it's just not going to meet their expectations. And get people on board with that decision is maybe already an uphill battle.
Well, there is the upside, assuming that the districting would work out, that they would be attending a brand new school.
Absolutely.
I think that's fair, like I empathize that people have to, you know, be on board and all of those things, but you'd be leaving Eight Corners in a really tough spot with their benchmarking. If you chose to close Pleasant Hill, by comparison, and I don't know if there's other workarounds or ways to approach it, but I think it is worth noting that in our area with the most growth and continues to seem to forecast the most growth, we're still talking about closing the littlest school with, yes, the littlest footprint, but also like we're basically telling the Eight Corners families, like, sorry about your benchmarking, we like trees.
Yeah, but Pleasant Hill isn't gonna have it.
That's what he said, that's what she said.
That's what I'm saying, though.
I mean. Go ahead.
Yeah, and we'll have outcry on the Eight Corners side of things too.
Yeah.
Just discussing the benchmarking, and brought it up to look at it. In site selection, there's obviously not much we can talk about specifics, but there was some limited discussion at our last meeting about potential workarounds regarding benchmarking fails and potential ways to address that can't be discussed in an open session.
At our SBAC executive session or site selection executive section?
That can't be talked about.
No,
At this-
but you
at
said
this-
there was discussion, but SBAC executive session or during site selection?
No, during site selection.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, is that specific to Eight Corners or all?
Trying to figure out how to answer this question.
I know.
Alyssa, which elements of the benchmarking at Eight Corners are you?
Sure, I'm looking at slide number 16.
From which deck?
From today's.
Oh.
It would be the regular ABA. Slide 16, 17, yeah.
And where they replace which one? They replace Pleasant Hill. It leaves, there we go, Eight Corners. But then if you go by comparison, if you go 2 more slides down and you replace Eight Corners. And so, one of the things I'll kind of note here is that, in kind of speaking against my own point, but either way, both of them do put future expansion in a bind.
feel like everyone's looking at me. Um,
Maybe one little bit progress forward. Nobody's talking about Blue Point. Do you think do you think we can say it's really between these two? Is that, without making that a vote?
I think, I mean, that's pretty obvious. Just for the sake of, it's 8:30 already. I'm hoping we can get to a motion, to, rather than a motion to eliminate the Blue Point schools and then a motion to like choose like, but.
But I think we also have to keep in mind that like this is related to one of the proposals. There is still another, right? Another option that is on the table for voters, right?
I'll make a motion. Just to throw it out there, but so that I use my terminology correctly, can you bring up the green headed slide with two? Thank you. Based on benchmarking criteria being met and cost, I guess. I would like to make a motion to move forward with ABA option 2. And eliminate ABA-A or ABA.
Second it
Yeah.
for discussion.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Yeah,
Say the motion again or the second?
the motion.
I'll keep it simpler this time. I make the motion to move forward with ABA dot 2.
But no specific school.
No specific school, just bringing us down to 3 items instead of 6 right now.
So the second row, the 380.
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
and for notes, Leroy seconded me.
So just to eliminate
Discussion.
the one with the option that keeps the schools the same size and just the focus on, right? Is that what ABA 2 means, that we're looking at one larger school? Okay.
One slightly larger with the rest.
Okay. The weird thing is I was trying to look at the benchmarking, because it looks like, not to open a can of worms, but 8 Corners does better in the benchmarking and the ABA 2 than it does in the ABA.
Yeah.
Is that why we're eliminating the first one?
I'm not following what she's saying. Are you?
Because you were talking about how bad 8 Corners looked on the benchmarking, but that's with the ABA.
Yes, that's, she made
she's looking-
So that's why we're eliminating it, so that okay,
I'm trying to eliminate the top row.
just the whole top row, right?
Yeah, the whole top row, no consideration to which school, just the whole top
Got
row.
it, Okay.
I'm just trying to move things along. If anyone else wants to make a different motion, we can.
No, it's probably,
this is
it's
fine.
probably the easier vote.
Yeah.
so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Larry?
Can I just confirm again that, doing a 380 student school, doing a larger school at Pleasant Hill does not impact the site deficiencies? By building a larger school, is it even worse for the site deficiencies at Pleasant Hill because of the small property?
If we're replacing Pleasant.
No,
No.
if you're expanding Pleasant Hill.
Taking the smaller or the larger.
Right.
It's marginal difference.
Comparison to the two of them.
Marginal difference in terms of the amount of additional classroom space that we need.
But you have more kids trying to use a too small playground, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
So-
I don't know how you quantify that.
That
but-
would be my concern about eliminating.
Yeah, so if you eliminate,
Schools, if we end up saying we're gonna retain Pleasant Hill,
Lost here.
only having the larger school option seems like even a worse.
hang process, I agree.
But I think
Wait, what?
Larry is worried, correct me if I'm wrong, Larry. Larry is worried that if we go with the rebuild being the bigger school, the 380 at this point, and then we make a future decision to keep Pleasant Hill, that we're asking ourselves to put a 380 student school on Pleasant Hills.
No, that's not what it says, because the 380 student is the new school.
Is the new
So,
school.
no matter
It's
what,
not
plus
380, but it's larger.
right? There's a, so the
So-
larger it is.
I got you, I got you.
The less there is at the other two.
So it makes Pleasant Hill smaller.
For purposes of discussion, if we,
Well, no, but
if you were to close 8 corners, you'd, Pleasant Hill would be at 224 under option 1 or A, and 290 under 8.2.
Right.
So it's an additional,
Oh, it's insecure.
do the math on that. Yeah, well, it's 224 to 290, but it doesn't impact the.
I think it's, wait, I wanna make sure I understand that. So 8.2 has a larger new school results in fewer students at Pleasant Hill,
Yes.
right? Okay,
Yep.
yes, making sure, all right.
224 versus.
And I'm good with the insurance.
Versus, yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Move the question.
Okay.
Wow, that's cool.
Nobody was talking.
What
He
happened?
moved to
He
the
just moved
question.
to a vote.
That means we vote.
Oh,
In
yeah.
discussion, I go to vote.
Seems optimal.
So I will call the vote, on the,
Second.
Yes, there was. Leland
I'll second.
seconded.
Oh, you did? Oh, I'm sorry.
It doesn't require.
Yeah.
to proceed forward with option ABA.2 for further consideration. Larry,
No.
Leroy,
Yes.
James,
Yes.
Tom, Escher,
No.
Fred,
Yes.
Paul,
Yes.
Rob,
No.
Sue,
Yes.
Dave,
Yes.
Jenna,
Yes.
Bill,
Yes.
Carrie,
Yes.
Charlie's a no. Alyssa,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
Annalee.
Yes.
April,
No.
Ava,
Yes.
Jillian,
Yes.
Elizabeth,
Yes.
the motion passes 15-5.
Wow. I really thought that was what you did.
What's
All right. Thank you, Elizabeth. All right, now we got.
Should we just take blue point off?
Yeah,
I think that's actually not a bad motion.
yeah.
I just feel bad making the motion right after I made motion.
Oh,
Yeah, well,
Wait,
I-
can we talk about Blue Point for a minute? Is there any reason? I mean, it seems like the location of it.
Hey,
I don't know why we want to take Blue Point off.
can I bring up something that came up at the sites committee meeting?
Mhm.
Last week, one of the options that we're looking at that would,
One of the site options.
one of the site options, which we can't explain, but is a Blue Point oriented school. We discussed that it actually, and folks, correct me if I'm wrong, that it would alleviate a ton of pressure, I think, on busing, and it would actually satisfy a good portion of the town's population. Can someone please back me up on that?
I think that it would potentially alleviate or accommodate growth on the west side of the turnpike, kind of southern part of the major growth area.
There was something very profound in its argument, though, for that site that we were talking about, that it was.
So I did go back and talk to the director of transportation and just, got a ballpark of like, what are the impact of, the things that we're considering. And, of what we're considering, she didn't see any major one way or the other that it was gonna save us runs or add more runs on what we were doing with certain things at certain spots. Obviously, if we go off of what we've already discussed, that could change, but there wasn't a major difference from her.
And I do think, like, Blue Point has its arguments. It's further away from town center. I don't know, don't argue me on mileage compared to Pleasant Hill, but it does have its arguments, everything. I think the other two sites are just more strapped, in my opinion. Between Pleasant Hill being so locked and small and Eight Corners, being population wise busting at the seams, and as well as off in a location that isn't necessarily desirable either. So just discussion to throw out there.
Jim?
Make a motion, we close Eight Corners.
Okay, replace,
Replace.
replace.
Gotta be replaced. No, there's not.
I'll second that for discussion.
Okay, so the motion for discussion is to replace Eight Corners with a 380 student school. Discussion?
Yes, so this would be ABA two.
ABA two, Eight Corners.
Fun fact, it's the best, it's the cheapest overall cost, and it is the cheapest cost per benchmark achievement.
Thank you.
We've got our data lines.
Yeah.
That's a great one.
That his matrix, it's the cheapest per benchmark achieved. I don't disagree. And I won't completely restate what I said before, but I stand by. I think Pleasant Hill is the most compromised site. And I don't think that we'll be happy with what we end up with at Pleasant Hill. Unfortunately, I hate to say that, but I think that if we go forward with a proposal to clear cut that lot and still have the amount of compromises that we're gonna have there, we're gonna regret that. And I think the voters will too.
Point of clarification.
Yes.
So the motion on the table is not to remove from consideration. That's, or
It is. No, the motion is
choose.
to replace Eight Corners
location.
at a new
Yes,
to a new
that's the
location with a
motion.
380 student school.
I mean, I think the Eight Corners argument makes sense because that's the only one that's really gonna be centrally located. Again, if we're talking about additional land acquisition, potentially, right, like that's favorably to that as well for future town projects potentially.
Can you repeat that? The lot at Eight Corners, you said is better for future.
No, so,
Can you read
the prospects of sites that we've looked at,
Yeah.
right? Like, if we chose to move forward with an Eight Corners, that's inherently going to be a more centrally located project, right? And then there's different opportunities potentially for additional land acquisition, which would then be centrally located for any future town projects. Potentially.
Yeah.
I will say in the argument of Pleasant Hill, that the benchmarking between closing in this option of 0.2, closing Pleasant Hill versus what? Replacing, sorry, Pleasant Hill versus Eight Corners doesn't seem all that different.
So just to respond to that, I don't think when you look at the benchmarking standards, the ones that are not met are fairly minor across the board. But when you look at the site and how compact that site is and what you're giving up for play space and playground space and Pleasant Hill to me feels like you're trying to fit 10 pounds in a 5-pound bag, but hold on, I'll go Fred and then Jenna.
I don't want to stifle this debate because we need to have this, but I don't understand why we have to vote on this tonight. Because no matter what outcome is, we've already directed them to build a 380 student building.
Because they need to send a school for renovation to the estimators.
they
They
still
need to
have
know
to
which
renovate.
schools are they renovating.
It's more, it's not
Oh,
the
it's
new
the
one, it's
renovations.
it's
Oh,
the
okay.
other ones,
Alright,
right, yeah, yep.
Jenna, I'll come back.
Yeah,
right
thanks.
next to you. Jenna?
As I'm thinking about Pleasant Hill, it feels like that neighborhood is kind of gonna be in a bind either way. If we keep the school where it is, the clear cutting is gonna be upsetting and it's large school, small space. On the other hand, if we if we replace that school, we're gonna have the concerns of additional people being bussed in, people being bussed in from farther, that traffic. So I just feel, I don't know what to do here, because it feels like Pleasant Hill and the neighbors there are potentially gonna be unhappy either way. Yeah.
Well, that and I-
Going to decide what's for the school itself.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yep.
I just have from the site committee, just a clarification on one thing you said. Someone from the site committee, correct me if I'm wrong. But if the Eight Corners was the 380 new student school, the site that it would most likely end up doesn't have room on it for future expansion for something else. We're basically using all of the non-wetland footprint. Is that correct from my site committee?
It's 2 sites.
But on the primary site, but
I think the proposal is to replace Eight Corners.
yeah, so where it's gonna
That's-
go, the primary site doesn't have extra land for future expansion. Like we're maxing out that space.
Oh, I don't think so.
You think there's extra? Okay.
No,
Okay.
I don't think so.
Yeah, there's two.
And I don't think it's true on either one.
One for sure and probably the other.
Yeah.
I think with Eight Corners too, right? Like that's from a site selection point of view in terms of talking about potential risks. Like that to me, I mean, that gives us options, right? Like
Yeah.
if we were to pick Pleasant Hill and for whatever reason we can't follow through on site issues. I guess I don't know what are the ramifications of that, like at the referendum? Are we just stuck?
I think we will have overpromised, yeah. I think if the land, if, no matter what, in any scenario, speaking to the delicateness of land deals, if we are unable to secure a site in the amount of time that council needs to send this to referendum, then we can't send it to referendum. And if we build an entire concept around a site and then we're unable to secure it, then we at the very least have to pause and pivot.
Great. Any other discussion? All right, call the vote. Yes, I will. So we are voting on the motion to move forward with the option to replace Eight Corners with a new 380 student school at a site TBD. Larry,
No.
Leroy,
Yes.
James,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Fred,
Yes.
Paul,
Yes.
Rob,
Yes.
Sue,
Yes.
Dave,
Yes.
Jenna,
Yeah.
Bill,
Yes.
Carrie,
Yes.
Charlie's a no. Alyssa,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
Annalee, April,
Yes.
Ava,
Yes.
Jillian,
Yes.
Elizabeth.
Yes.
The motion passes 18-2. All right.
I know it was my own one.
Thank you, guys. I know that wasn't easy. I appreciate sticking through it.
Thank you.
What was that? All right, we do have just 2 more agenda items before we can adjourn. Public comment, Matt, anything?
Leroy and I, oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, come on up. Matt.
Yeah, while you guys were in executive session, I was answering trivia. I want a hat. I came in second by myself.
You came in, better taking over the TV here.
So,
Ready to run?
Leroy and I went back and forth with this. It's this week or this past week was last week for Leader, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, last week.
And so we had talked a little bit about this on the town calendar, that forum isn't on there. Because I guess it's date to be determined, but in the notes, it says it's April 30th.
Yeah, we'll get it on there.
Well, for my 2 cents, you only got 3 weeks. So I think if you at least put it on there and have to postpone it, somebody's gonna know that it's there. That's where I find out if there's gonna be a meeting here, because it's too cumbersome to go to the SBA, school department, find the committee and click. I just go to the calendar, go click Monday, nothing. Click Monday, 6 o'clock, or whatever. So just for what it's worth, even if you have to reschedule it, we've lost your other point of communication. I would try and exploit every single other avenue that you have. So,
Are you saying add it to the school board?
no, if you go on the town's website,
Okay.
townofscarborough.com, and you click in the little right-hand corner, it drops down. You've got calendar, you've got something else. There are like 3 of them.
It is on the school calendar.
Right,
That's helpful.
but it's not on the town.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yep.
It needs
So
to be on
that's
there.
just another place to look it up. And if you go through whatever's on that calendar, there are meetings that are canceled, there are meetings that are postponed. And so if somebody sees it next week and it has to get pushed off, they'll click on, go, what time is that? Oh, it's postponed until May 7th or whatever.
And as we discussed, we needed to get through this first.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
We can probably get it up there right away.
Yeah.
Tomorrow when we have our communications
Yeah,
meeting.
I like
But we
that
need to
about
get
the
through
cost
this.
was, you said something, people are gonna want numbers, which is understandable, but I think at least if you get some word out that somebody can voice their opinion, other than me.
We got a clearer perspective. there.
Yeah.
Matt, just to give you an update, it's on the calendar.
Oh, perfect, excellent. So.
See, I was
Hot
hoping
off the
when I
press.
get back,
Well done.
that was-
See, that's it.
There we
Anything
are.
else I had, the concerns about Blue Point or Moot, as far as stumps and anything else, but considering you're going with 8 corners, so. That's all I've got.
Congrats
Nice
on your
work.
big win.
Good job, thanks.
Is there anybody online for public comment? Going once, going twice. Okay. With that, motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor?
Hey.
Motion passes. Have a